Hello, this is Professor Kitch again, and this is part 3 of our little Excel block here in Introduction to Engineering. And in part 3, we're going to learn how to use the logical if function to make more complex formulas. And this time I'm going to do a little bit of background before we actually get to the Excel. I want to talk to you about the syntax of the if function. That syntax is kind of a weird word. Really, syntax is just a name for the grammar of computer languages, and what we're actually doing here is just a teeny little bit of coding. And if you're familiar with computer coding, this will all sound familiar. If not, this is a really simple introduction to it. So the syntax of the if statement looks like this. You have if, and then there's three things that computer scientists call arguments that go into the if statement: argument 1, argument 2, and argument 3. That's kind of a funny name for things. You could just think of it as there's three things that go into the if function: thing 1, thing 2, and thing 3. And that very first thing that goes in is a truth test. In other words, it's something we're going to put in there, and it's either going to be true or false. And if the first thing is true, then we'll do thing 2. We'll do the second part. So we're going to do that if part 1 is true. If part 1 is false, if the truth test is false, then we'll do that third thing. And so that's the basic syntax of the if statement. You have a truth test, and then the thing you're going to do if it's true, and then the thing you're going to do if it's false. So we're going to go back to our same spreadsheet to learn how to use the if statement. Now, one of the questions we had in our project was, of all of these time trials that we did here, in how many of those was the velocity actually greater than the average velocity? So how many times did we get around faster than the average velocity? So we're going to use this column here, greater than average, to determine that. And what I want to do is I want to check each one of these velocity values in here, and if it's greater than the average, I'm going to put yes in here, and if it's less than the average, I'm going to put no in there. So we're going to use the if statement to do that. And I'm just going to start typing like we have before. So I'm going to type equals, and I'm going to start typing if, and notice the if statement pops up right away. So here's if, and notice it's giving me a hint here. It says, hey, the first thing you need to put in there is a logical test. That's that truth test I said about. So what's the truth test? Well, the truth test is if the velocity I computed, which is here in this cell, is greater than the average velocity, which is down in this cell, then the thing is true. And so I'm going to then enter a comma to go to the next part. Then what do I want to do if the value is true? Well, if the value is true, I want the word yes to appear in there. And if I want to put in characters in Excel here, I have to put it in quotes. So I'm going to just type quote, Y-E-S, quote. All right, and that's what's going to happen if it's true. If it's true, put the word yes in this cell. And I'm going to type comma. Now I'm into this value if false. So this is the do this part if the truth test is false part. And if it's not greater than the average, then I want it to write in no. And I'm going to use a capital N there. Great. So now this first value is less than the average. Let's make sure that right. That first value was 7.62. The average was 11.08, so that's true. It's not greater than the average. And now, of course, what I can do is just copy this down all the way, right? And that looks good, except that, boy, this is telling me that almost everything is greater than the average. That can't be true. Well, what's going on here? Let me click on this cell and find out. Oh, I see. You notice that right here that this is comparing E13, which is the value right there, to this number. It's not comparing it to the average, which is right there. I've made that mistake I did earlier about relative versus absolute cell references. So let's go fix that. I'm going to escape out of there. I'm going to come back to this equation, and I want to realize that this place where the average is, E36, that should be an absolute reference. So I'm going to type my dollar signs in there. So that's an absolute reference, because every time I compare this velocity here to the average, I want this cell down here to be locked in. So now I'm going to do that. I'm going to copy that down. By the way, you can You see how your cursor changes when you get on that little green thing? If you just double click that, it'll copy it all the way down for you. And now, I think these are right. Let me double check one by just checking here in the middle. Yep, and sure enough, this is going to compare the value right there to this value down there. And life is really good. So now I know which ones are greater than the average and which ones are less than the average. But I really want to count all those all up. Now I could come down here from the top and say, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But you know, we want to do this stuff automated, so we don't have to do that all the time. So we're going to use another function. This is just another function, just like the functions we learned to use last time. We're going to use a function, one of the counting functions. And if you start typing count, you're going to get a bunch of different counts. Count A. Count A counts the number of cells that aren't empty. Count blank counts the number of cells that are blank. And we're going to use this one called COUNTIF. It counts the number of cells within a range that meet a given condition. Well, that sounds confusing, but let's just try it. So it says COUNTIF. It's giving my little hint here that it wants the range. It wants the range of cells that we want to count in. Well, that's this range. All right, and then I'm going to type comma, and then it's going to give me a criteria. It says, well, what does it want me to count? Well, I want it to count anything where the word yes is in the cell. So I'm just going to, again, in quotes, put the word yes, hit return, hit enter. There I go. It says there are 11 cells greater than the average. And we could check real fast to see if that's right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Perfect. Looks like it did it just right. So let's quickly review our learning objectives. We wanted to use the logical if function to make more complex formulas. Remember that the form of the if function is the 3 parts. The first one's the truth test. The second one is what we're going to do if the first part's true. And the third part is what are we going to do if the first part is false. And as a special bonus, we learned the COUNTIF function, which has 2 pieces to it. The first part is what's the list of stuff we might want to count, and the second part describes those things within that list that we really want to count. I hope you found that interesting and fun, and I'll play around with these functions and have a good time.